Hi readers, active and passive, welcome to Dini's Reading Corner. I am Dino Manisa, a reader, a thinker, a yapper. Before we get started with today's video, I just want to put a disclaimer up front that this is not actually a book review, and I know this is going to be like a contentious political issue, but I want to say I put out this channel to not be political, and I wanted to encourage young kids to read, and especially for the impoverished Black youth in the Eastern Cape. I wanted them to use education as a means of escaping poverty. And then I realized, flip, bro, even that is a political statement. To say I want kids to read, that is a political activity. So I've just decided, okay, fine, you know what, lean in for some topics I was trying to explore, and yeah, just present facts. Also, I just want to say, I do want to talk about dumb things, like I want to talk about a celebrity and think about the political things that, themes that affect their behavior, for example, So I watch a lot of like even 2-hour videos of American creators who talk about, oh, the Kardashians have stolen from the Black culture. This thing is now saying they are now more right-wing. For example, they voted for Trump. They wore this to the inauguration. They are now taking out their BBLs. Like, girl, I live for things like that. I want to talk about how them taking out their BBLs or their butt lifts and stuff is now saying they want to be more aligned to whiteness, and how that's like a classist thing or the turn of the economy. These are things I enjoy. Like, give me dumb stuff and make it educational, make it academic, and I'm like, I'm sucking that up. And when I said this to people on WhatsApp, they were like, okay, fine, you only do it yourself, because yeah, our creators are talking about real issues like the economy and tariffs. So yeah, this is the preamble to this video. And in not being political, I found that 99% of things in life are political. I just haven't found the 1%, which is why I'm going to title the playlist where I talk about dumb stuff that are not related to books as Everything is Political. Okay, cool. Let's get into it. How I found myself creating this video and thinking about this type of video is how I love Disney films, So we all grew up with Disney, Snow White, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, and I was Sleeping Beauty because I loved sleep and I was lazy. Zico was Cinderella because she was like, oh my gosh, I'm so hardworking, I'm a cleaner, and she wanted to be better than us. And then Lola was Snow White because she was light skinned. So we grew up with all these characters, and if you look at those characters that you grew up with versus the movies that they've been putting out in recent years, you'll see that there's a change. And I'm talking about movies like Moana, OG favorite, Frozen, Coco, Encanto, Turning Red. So things like this. Like, I am a Disney adult, bro. I used to make an excuse like, it's because the kids are no. I can quote Invincible lines. Sorry, The Incredibles lines, things like that. So I am not going to excuse my love anymore. I'm just going to lean into it and now think about that, So I love Disney and I love the films that they've been putting out in recent years. And I was just thinking in like how all those films are paying homages to different cultures. Frozen is the Nordic culture. Moana is the Polynesian culture. What else? Coco, the Spanish culture. I don't know where actually. Yeah, so like Turning Red was for Asian cultures. So I was just thinking about flip, how on earth is Disney like doing more for cultures and people's customs compared to South African media? Because if I think of South African media, and forgive me for this because I'm gonna go on a tangent, I think of Moja Love and I hate that. I think of Big Brother and I ask myself, what do kids benefit from watching Big Brother, for example? And I think of things like adulting. And I was like, what the hell? If I compared this to media back in the day, like Generations, and how they portrayed Black people in corporate and, moving upwards in life, and how people are inspired to have corporate jobs because of that. And I look at what we have now, I'm like, what are we teaching our youth? What do you want kids to aspire to? It gets me angry. It was like, Moja Love, what are you doing? It's like, where America is a Jerry Springer, you can be inspired by Jerry Springer, but not to this extent. Can you give us something positive, please? So that's what I was thinking about. That's a tangent. But yeah, when I think of South African media, I don't think much respect, tribute, and homage has been paid to the different tribes that exist here. And that's my thing. We have like such a rich history and culture. Why can't you do that, And I want this to be in the mainstream media, which is the question that I came up with. How come Disney is doing more in the mainstream for different minority cultures than South Africa is doing for its own people, And that's where the video begins. Before we get started, I just want to say, if you see me looking down, I'm looking at my notes. I have this AirPod in because I'm using it as a mic. My apartment is a huge echo. And yeah, let's get started. Also, I know I gave Disney a lot of credit, but I also want to say that I know that in the past they've pushed out certain narratives about different groups of people. So even when I said, oh my gosh, Disney's doing more for these cultures and minority cultures, we have to acknowledge the fact that they've been called out before and they have portrayed certain racial stereotypes that were racist and inaccurate. For example, Pocahontas was an inaccurate representation of what actually happened. Pocahontas was a child. There was no falling in love with John Smith, for example. John Smith was not that handsome, young, or blonde. And the whole reason that Pocahontas was kidnapped and taken to Britain was because of political reasons, and it was not that good ending, you know. So even when I was like, oh my gosh, you know, Disney's doing amazing for minority cultures, like I need to take that with a grain of salt. Like this is also the company that has spread out dangerous and harmful stereotypes about people. Okay, editor me here. So I just realized that I don't specifically link what I talk about in the video and the intro that I did being Disney films. So like I said, the main question that I asked myself in this video is, why can South African mainstream media produce shows and content that pays homage to different cultures and the histories of the different people, just like Disney does with minority cultures? The short answer that I found, that is based on my own assumptions and my own worldviews that have biased the research of this video, is your theory that traditional lifestyles not being portrayed for the everyday person because South Africa was colonized, the erasure of culture was done, and surprisingly there was classism amongst black people too. I am hard-pressed to think of characters who carry their African spirituality as part of their identity and not their main identity in movies and series, compared to how going to church for other characters has been portrayed. And if people are shown in their African spiritual lifestyles in South African media, there's not much else to them. And if the series is based on African spirituality, it usually has to do with witchcraft and people being evil. For example, Ikazi. Like, bro, magical forces of darkness. Is this the only thing that we're known for when we talk about African spirituality? And I find that if people do engage with whatever tribe that they belong to, it's usually for here and there. For example, Imigidi, those special events, Heritage Day, etc. So on the question of why South African can do more in mainstream media for cultures and different types of people, I think to myself about the different beliefs that we have in terms of African culture and religion. And I think about how contentious that is and how those two groups and two schools of thought are often at odds with each other. Okay, fine, so let's get started with that, you know. So in South Africa, if you meet someone who's Christian, like hardcore Christian, they're usually not going to be believing in African spirituality, and they will go as far as to demonize African spirituality and talk about don't worship the dead, don't pray to anyone other than God, don't look for the living amongst the dead, do not worship idols, things like that, you know. And they come up with this whole laundry list of like why African spirituality is inherently demonic, right? And then you get the other group of people who are practicing African spirituality. And to be honest with you, I've seen majority of these people who practice African spirituality to be people who also believe in God. And I fall in the second camp, just to spoiler alert, yeah, mom. So that's why I'm engaging with this, like just to think about it in an open-minded way, because I fall in the second camp. And these people usually are open-minded and are very much live and let live when it comes to people and how they walk with life, you know. This religious group is like, you know, God is the only way in life. If you're not doing that, you're doing it wrong. And then African spirituality people are like, you know what, vibes. I have this gift from my ancestors. I can prophesy. I can see things. I can, you know, like make medicine, things like that. And I'm like, they're open-minded. And how did I come across African spirituality? Then I'll say my family. But like when we were growing up, we went like heavy in the African spiritual thing. I'm just saying, us as kids, we were living for most of the life just going to church, and I was deeply in the SEO at school. And I remember when my great-grandmother died, she was a Gqirha, and she had to have her beads and necklaces distributed amongst the descendants. And that's when we started now practicing that. For me, like that's when I can remember actually going into the African spiritual route and like doing these customs. And I remember even when we started, I had this fear and like, oh my gosh, in the SEO, the student pastor said that it's demonic to do this and this. And my brain was like, actually no. And we're not praying to these people, we're praying to God. God is the most powerful entity in the universe, but we're just paying respects to the dead. And I'm like, oh, okay. But to be honest with you, I didn't care. And I remember thinking that my main stress in life is education. Will I pass the next grade? Will I pass the next test? I don't care if we like doing this or not. I'm like, okay, fine, vibes. I'm just here along for the ride. And I remember now how being this open-minded or not caring, to be honest, like, oh, I have this bracelet from my grandmother's necklace and every other grandchild has this and all her kids have this, so like all her descendants had some piece of her necklaces and beads with her. And I remember now how that became an issue in school, and talking about the teachers and our peers like in different schools as well, who were like, oh my gosh, that's demonic. And it's like, okay, thank you so much for that. And bro, I really hope that the Bella Act is going to help with this in terms of how inclusive schools are going to be towards African cultures. Because if a Zulu child has this or a Xhosa child has like a thing that's cultural to them, I hope that it's going to help with those kids feeling welcomed and not ostracized for their cultural beliefs, because we are in Africa after all, so I hope the Bella Act is going to help with that. But with us, yeah, our teachers are like, this is a distraction, it's making a mess of the school uniform, whatever. And I remember being like, I don't think it's that deep, but okay. And we took those away. So for me, it started then, and how even in mainstream culture, in terms of being in school, that was wrong. That was like heavily discouraged. And when we had chats with our peers and our kids, different kids from different schools, they were so heavily against this thing. And it's like, why? We're not even imposing it on you. And I think that's where my contention with this topic comes in, because these people haven't interrogated their inherited schools of thoughts, and they haven't talked to and critiqued and interrogated and wrestled with their own beliefs before they bash your beliefs. Because have you talked about how you came to be Christian as a South African? Have you dealt with XYZ before you bash this certain religion or certain belief? And I just want to say, I am not criticizing religion. I am just criticizing the political means in which this religion has reached these people, So that's where I was like, maybe let's talk about this, right? Fine. I am a Christian. I am a deep fan of Jesus. I'm a believer. I'm a Christian. I follow Jesus. I am a fan of Jesus. And I just need to state these are two different things. I am a fan of Jesus as a historical figure. And he was amazing in terms of upending social norms, talking about sexism and class. Guys, if I give examples, like Jesus let a woman who was on her period touch him, and he knew this woman was in his period. On her period. And this was at a time when women who were bleeding on their menstrual periods were considered unclean, and anything and everything that they touched was unclean, and Jesus allowed this woman to touch him. Like, just first of all, Jesus washed the feet of his disciples, and that was a role that was reserved for the lowest servant in the house, and Jesus did this. So as much as I'm not criticizing religion, Jesus, and the whole Christian faith, I want to question the agenda in why minority groups and their cultural beliefs, African spirituality specifically, have been demonized and ostracized. This was not just something that happened to happen. This was like an outright political mission that had intentionality, that was funded, and then we have these people falling for it. Why and how come they're not questioning it? So possible answers that I've come up with included an article I read on Medium, and they said that imposing Christian beliefs on natives and indigenous people were a means of asserting colonial control and to justify the exploitation of African people, which kind of makes sense to me. If you don't see these people as people and whatever they're doing as a religion, and you're saying what they're doing is worshiping demons, you're taking away their humanity. They're not humans, So it's easy for us to exploit things that are not human, basically. And you're not going to respect their ways of life. You're not going to respect that this is a religion to them. It kind of makes sense to me. So if we get people to follow this doctrine in a shared space, for example, church, where we can preach the message from the pulpit, include giving up worldly goods so that we can enjoy these goods in heaven, while the colonizer themselves are enjoying those goods now, for example, taking your land, taking your cattle, but that's another topic. That means there's not much room for them to disagree with this, because you're preaching from the pulpit and you're saying if you question these things, that means you have demonic intentions. And if you question this thing, that means you lack faith. So it is very important for these people to be accepting of whatever they're being taught, and it is especially important to not question what they're being taught. Do not question why we are taking your tithes and we are buying private jets. Joel Austin, I still listen to these people, by the way, but I just like, they're not above critique. You can listen to the message and be like, but the messenger though, you know. So I do think that is like a good point. And this whole thing of accepting the teaching of God without question and how it's leading to your faith, I think, guys, that is such a dangerous thing. And if we encourage critical thinking, we encourage critical thinking everywhere but religious, because now it means that you are questioning God, and you're not really questioning God. I'm saying question the political agenda behind this thing, okay? So, like, as Nizindo, I keep asking myself, why was it written like this? Why did Paul say this about women, for example? Do you think Jesus would say this? Like Jesus, the character that we know, who let a bleeding woman touch him, would he say this? The Jesus who went after the most marginalized people in society, the lowest class, the lowest gender, would he say, maybe you shouldn't speak? But the same Jesus who said, yeah, the ones with the sin should cast, without sin should cast the first stone. That's funny. That's funny. But if you question anything in the Bible, then you're the person in the wrong. I will touch on that when I'm talking about feminism and Christianity, honestly, because, oh my God. And when I say that religion sometimes works with you getting this message and not questioning it, I do think that it is to benefit people in power. For example, in Animal Farm, George Orwell has this character, the Scarecrow, that preaches to the animal about Sugarcane Mountain. And that is the animal's heaven, basically, where only the good animals, the hardworking animals, the ones who don't complain, go to heaven at the end of the day, which is still similar to the preaching of what colonized countries had, where it's like, it's okay, give up your worldly possessions. If you're good, if you don't complain, if you're grateful for everything in life, you will find your riches in heaven, you know? And I do think that sometimes organized religion works hand in hand with the powers that be to keep people subdued. And if I think of missionaries, I've had people say, you know, missionaries had good intentions. They just wanted to spread the word of God, and they weren't actually like colonizing people and, you know, treating them badly. They were actually treating people good. And I do want to say that two things can be true at once. What I want to say is there is no institution that's beyond reproach. Like I said, oh my gosh, I think Disney is doing amazing with, you know, putting out content that celebrates minorities. At the same time, question why Disney is doing this, and question their legacy. Have they done this in the past? No. Question the church and the legacy and the intention, you know. So I'm just saying, no institution is beyond reproach. I would like people to always question things, you know, just question why. Don't take things at face value. I want to encourage critical thinking. Like, oh my gosh. So the narrative of how demonic African spirituality has been something that has heavily pushed from the onset, from when missionaries arrived to this day. It's spoken about in church, it was done in popular culture to pit one group against the other, and people have ended up believing it, which is something that I have a problem with. So, you know, when things fall apart now, the missionaries come, and the son of the main character, Ogongo, I'm going to try to not say the names because I'm going to butcher them. So the firstborn son of Ogongo joins the missionaries and is one of the first people to be changed and, you know, evangelized, I think. So when they came to Nigeria, those people like targeted the lowest of the low, the people who were deserted by the cultures, the slaves, you know, the women or the twins, things like that. So they went after the lowest of the low, and then they said to these people, hey, that culture is actually demonic. That culture is barbaric, and the only good people that exist are Christians, you know? And I think of how this narrative, even though it's just a novel, is actually true in real life. So I think of how Christianity spread in South Africa as well. So missionaries came, right, saying, okay, fine, we're going to spread the word of God. But the way they did it, the best, the most effective way, was to have missionary schools. And to be or to attend missionary schools and to get an education, you needed to be a Christian, right? So imagine this colonial times and your way of life is ruined. You're no longer hunting and gathering. There are industries now. If you want to get money, if you want to find food and buy food for your family, you need to find a job. And to find a job, you need to have an education. And these missionaries are saying, hey, here's the education. We're just going to pray for you. We're going to teach you the Bible. And we are going to convert you into this new religion. And you're thinking to yourself, that's fine. My son can go there because we need to survive these changing times, you know. And what you think to yourself is, even though he's going there and he's going to learn about this God that you don't know, I am still going to teach him about the ways and customs of our people when he gets home. But what happens is these people are so heavily indoctrinated that they actually believe these things and see their customs and culture as demonic, you know. So that's what happened in Things Fall Apart, and that's what happened in South Africa. I have no problem with this, but I've seen how people who believe in God often think that they're better than people who don't. I've seen people who believe in God and deep Christian see themselves as better than people who worship or practice African spirituality, you know. I'm not going to say worship ancestors, but, you know, some people do. So when this happened, when people who got an education happened to be Christian because the missionaries required them to be Christian, I see how this manifested because the people now left behind who were still able to practice their cultures were now left uneducated. And that's when because they were uneducated and now they were poor as a result. So that's where I see the classism with South Africa. But if you believe in ancestors and if you worship, you know, anything in African spirituality, then you are inherently dumb, because that's how it was portrayed back in the day. People in the missionaries, they really had to stop believing in African spirituality and to deeply believe this is demonic, this is beneath them, and the only good way in life is X, you know. And if you're not following X, then you're beneath us. Sure. I have linked the UNISA study about how missionary schools in South Africa were covertly and overtly indoctrinating their learners away from their indigenous cultures and into being civilized and stop being heathens. South Africa isn't the only colonized nation that this happened in. We find examples of nations being colonized and the indigenous people not being allowed to speak their languages or practice their cultural customs, leading to a loss of culture and language that is still being felt today. These nations include the native people in America, including New Zealand and Australia, and India. Those are the ones at the top of my list, just from how I've engaged popular culture, you know, when I watch YouTube and stuff. And I know this video focuses on culture, but it would be remiss if I didn't talk about the other effects of colonization and the loss of culture that these people had with the biosystem that they found themselves in. So ecosystems were destroyed, animals were hunted to the point of near extinction or extinction. And I'm talking about the bison in America, dodo birds in Mauritius, blue antelope and quagga in South Africa, and those are just from the top of the Google search. And with that, we come to the end of the video essay. My hope in creating this video isn't to bash people about their beliefs, but it is an act of hope and to plea for people to engage with sensitive topics like this with the respect that they deserve and with an open and curious mind. I am really disappointed by how some religious people hold the African spirituality with disdain and think that it's demonic. But from now on, I hope that if you ever find yourself in a conversation like this, you can balance the two schools of thought that come with a nuanced topic like this. I like nuance, and I think we need more of it. Two things can be true at once. For example, I like modern day medicine and I can really appreciate it, even though I know that it was done on black women without local anesthesia. Like this topic, I really love God, I'm a follower of Jesus, but I can also interrogate the system that ensured that Christianity was the dominant religion in South Africa at the expense of local beliefs and cultures. In this video essay, I remain respectful of the actual religion that I'm a part of while being critical of the political systems that brought us here in the first place. And also, it's a plea to South African media to write stories that can inspire us and tell the rich history of our cultures. We shouldn't look to Western media companies to tell the stories of our people. And with that, I ask you to always question, develop critical thinking, and until next time, with love, Lineo.